The Israelites thought that there was no way, that there was not a chance in hell that their lives could be any worse than they were in slavery in the land of Egypt. But faced with utter deprivation, their most basic and essential needs coming under threat, as their mouths became parched and their stomachs growled, as their children cried out in hunger pains, they began to wonder as they wandered if this was hell. And this is part of our story as people of faith. Part of our story is the frustration and confusion, the doubt and the feeling of betrayal that the Israelites went through, God's chosen people. And part of our story is that we come from a God who makes a way out of no way. And in that there is beauty and grace within our lives. And in that there is a message about God's kingdom. In the story, we see that everyone can harvest and have enough. And maybe, as we listen to this story of faith, we can be changed by this story and stop dividing and start uniting, because only then will we have a chance in hell.
The story is from Exodus 16, verses 1 through 18. The whole congregation of the Israelites set out from Elim, and Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them, whether they will follow my instruction or not. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on the days." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaining against the Lord. For what are we that you complain against us?" And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and your fill of bread in the morning, because the Lord has heard the complaining that you utter against him, what are we? Your complaining is not against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of Israelites, 'Draw near to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining.'" And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, "I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God." In the evening the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as the frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" for they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer to a person according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their tents." The Israelites did so, some gathering more, some gathering less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing left over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as needed. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Amen.
Would you please pray with me? Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be glorified in your sight, for you, O God, are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I have only hitchhiked once in my life, and it's not something that I widely recommend to people, so any little ones in the church, do not do this. I largely have not hitchhiked because I watched too much true crime as a high schooler, and I'm paranoid a little bit about the risk. But the year after I graduated college, one of my good friends was through hiking the Appalachian Trail. And he started in March in Georgia, and he was making his way up over the 2,000 miles to a mountain in Maine. And as he was working his way through western Connecticut and Massachusetts, he wasn't too far from where I was living. And he was so close that I could not miss out on this opportunity to join him on this grand adventure. So I parked my car in an old Kmart lot where I met my friend as he resupplied, and we headed out. There was a motley crew on the trail. Most people were given a new name by those that they hiked with, and my friend had become Birdman as he had studied birds in college. There was also Texas Pete and his mama, who were hiking after the grief of losing their husband and father. There was Sunshine, who was hiking after having served 2 tours in Iraq. And there was a young couple who had started the trail to get engaged to other people, and by the time they had made it to Connecticut, they had lost those other people and found one another. As we hiked, they told stories. They told stories of being out of water and stumbling across some trail magic, coolers left by do-gooders on the trail filled with the things that they might need, a treat to encourage them along, and the necessities there to help them survive, these modern-day miracles. Now, my trip on the trail was short, and once off, I didn't realize how far exactly I had gone from my car, and I needed to get back. My feet were sore, and I wanted to walk as little as possible. So, looking around, I stuck my thumb out and I stood by the road as cars passed, one after the other after the other. Maybe the people in those cars had watched true crime too. And I began to give up hope. And so I started walking, keeping my thumb out, just in case. And my knight on faithful steed was replaced with an old man in a new, huge, glistening Mercedes. And he asked me where I was headed, and he offered me a ride, and I got in, a little nervous. He chatted with me about the weather and about hiking, but the car began to slow before we got to the Kmart. "I need to get something," he said, as we pulled into a gas station. "This is where I'm going to die," I began to think. Where the previously wonderful older gentleman in my mind had become now a famed serial killer. He puts the car in park and he asks if I need anything. I tell him I'm fine, and he leaves the car running as he goes inside to a convenience store. He leaves this very nice car, key in the ignition, with a total stranger who hasn't showered in days and looks a little rough. He trusted me. He was only gone a minute, and he came back with 2 Gatorades and a bag of peanut M&Ms. Just in case, he says, handing me a Gatorade and tearing open the bag. We live in a world of projected outcomes, of cost-benefit analysis and calculated risk, where we measure outcome potential and where we attempt to optimize returns. But our lives hold so much that is unimaginable. Our lives hold things that cannot be calculated or projected. This past week, I spent 4 days in an intensive course at Kellogg Business School on strategic planning and leadership within congregational life. And it was amazing, and it was inspirational, and I have to admit my own bias. I knew going in that I would learn lots of valuable information about optimizing teams and product growth and management. And I also knew that all of you who are business people in this church are some of the most faith-filled people that I have ever met. But I have to admit, I was a little skeptical about these business people out there in the world. I did not expect the level of faith and commitment that I found. And it gave me hope. But I did not take everything whole hog. See, one day we had a lecture with Harry Kramer, who's the former CEO of Baxter International, which I actually don't even know what Baxter does, but he was the CEO of Baxter International. And he talked about value-based leadership. One thing that Harry shared is that a good leader is never surprised. That as effective leaders, that we should be self-reflective enough that the surprises of this life fade away. Now, as an avid contingency planner who plans sunny and rainy day activities on every vacation I go on, and who has a calendar that has different outcomes based on how the day could go, I understand Harry's point. That so often we are surprised by life because we don't take the time to notice or think things through. But honestly, sometimes life is surprising. Sometimes, like the Israelites in the desert, we are caught off guard by tragedies that are worse than we could ever imagine. Maybe a loved one gets sick too soon, or parents cradle their sick little ones. A relationship can disintegrate and jobs can evaporate. The world which we imagined might not be what we thought. As men march in streets with tiki torches and women and girls cry out, "Me too," the ugliness and pain of life surprises us. And we, like the Israelites, we feel lost in the desert. And we know that this is not the promised land, that lions are not lying down with lambs. We cannot find milk and honey, let alone food for all who hunger. Swords and guns have not been turned into tools for peace, but have been turned toward neighbor. We find ourselves hungering, starving for lives that matter. We long for deep connection and belonging. We thirst for meaning and for purpose. We long for security, to avoid the deserts of our lives altogether, to pass go and collect that $200. And while that might seem or feel comfortable, it is not true or honest. And with all due respect to Harry Kramer, there is no amount of reflection that can save us from the surprises of life. We are surprised and our hearts are broken open in pain that we cannot imagine. But I truly believe that ours is a God that makes a way in the midst of the deserts. And our hearts are also broken in awe and wonder and hope. And in the deserts of our lives, as we cry out to God, manna falls from heaven, and there is enough. There is enough for all, and we are enough. Thinking about this story, the Israelites cried out and God provided. But God did not provide an assessment of all of their needs. The scripture does not read, and a scroll containing a topographical map descended from the heavens with a big X and a "You are here" sign. No, God did not provide maybe even an important piece of the puzzle. God also didn't take a grocery list from the Israelites, getting everyone their favorite comfort food. No, it was a simple substance like dew and the birds from the bush, and it was enough. What was needed was provided, and together, not just one or two, but all the people went out to harvest, and they were surprised by God's abundance. This past week, a good friend of mine gave birth to an incredibly beautiful baby girl. And she was in labor for a long time, and it was hard, and it was exhausting, and it hurt like hell. But after those hours of pain and pushing, and after those months of waiting and dreaming, baby Esther was brought into this world. The story of Esther from the Bible is one of a strong woman who is challenged to make the world better with the words, "You were born for such a day as this." Maybe in this broken world, we think of abundance wrong. We think of me over you, me before you, me first, America first. But what if we thought about me and you, us together, where we all take and everyone has enough? And it isn't going to be easy because something new is being born. And we have to breathe and push. And maybe together we get to be part of this radical kingdom. And we will be surprised by the abundance that we find. And maybe, like little Esther, we were born for such a day as this. And maybe then, and only then, will we have a chance in hell. Amen.